Hello again, we are on day 4. Now so far we've been thinking about how to get your classes off the ground, how to get them launched, what you need to consider to actually begin teaching your classes. And now we're going to turn our attention to the actual classes themselves. So your students are in the room. What do you do with them? Well, that's going to hugely vary depending on a number of factors. But one thing that I can talk to you about today is lesson structure. No matter what your content is, it's really important that you think about the structure of your group class. As I'm sure you do with your one-to-one, I'm sure you have some kind of structure that you follow for each student. It's even more important that we have a structure in group piano, and I'm going to go through the reasons and some ideas for you. So why do we need a structure, a good structure for our group lessons? Well, we need a structure in order to ensure that we are delivering the most outstanding lessons that we can. Anything with order, with thought, with planning is going to work much better than sporadic content. And this goes not only for your lesson structure, it also goes for kind of the overarching structure of what you're trying to achieve with your kids. So if you have a list of kind of objectives, say, and you know what you want your kids to achieve over a certain amount of time, that's an overarching structure, and you need that to ensure that everyone's progressing as you want them to. Then within your class, you need a structure to make sure that those wider objectives are happening, and you would need to have learning objectives within your class, and everything around those that you do around the piano, around the different activities, they'll be based around these lesson objectives. The other reason why structure is so important is because our kids need it. They need to know, they need a consistent structure, they need to know what's going on within each lesson and from week to week. Once kids know and understand the structure, it means a lot for their ability to access the lesson. It means that they they know what their expectations are, they know what our expectations are of them. They are kind of more in their sweet spot for learning. We're setting up a really conducive learning environment by giving them a structure. So what do we mean by structure? Well, we mean, as I said, the planning, so what you want your kids to learn during the lesson, but we also mean actual activities. So how do you start your lesson? How do you introduce the piece or the concept or the topic? How do you deliver it? How do you teach it? How do they learn it? Which activities do you have? In what order do you have these activities? How do you progress with the lesson? So you kind of got a beginning and then a middle, and then how do you end the lesson? Now, a very classic kind of way to talk about structure in the wider educational context is to talk about having a starter where you would introduce a concept, and this is where with groups you can have some really solid plans and ideas about what it is that each of your pieces that you're doing with the kids are teaching, what are their learning points. So you're kind of introducing the concepts, and then those concepts are kind of consolidated through learning the piece. So you've got these concepts, you introduce them with a game or a song, etc. Then you would introduce the piece, then they would practice it, and then at the end you would have a plenary, which is kind of a summing up of what you've done, an opportunity for students to show you that they've understood or to show you they've met learning objectives. I mean, this isn't particular to group piano, this is, as I say, what would be happening in most classrooms across certainly the UK, and I think the US as well, and various other places. So we need to be following that as well, because the reason those things are in place is so that you're really clear that you are teaching something that is going to work, something that's worthwhile for the children, something where they can see their progress and they can enjoy the lesson because it's predictable, they know what's coming. I think sometimes when it comes to, if there's ever a situation where there's poor behaviour in a group class, it might be that it's just all a little bit random and sporadic, and kids need that sense of structure. So that is why structure is so important in group lessons. So I said a little bit about what the structure should include, that you should be thinking about objectives that you want your kids to achieve, and then you should be thinking about the different activities that could both impart information, give students an opportunity to evidence that they have learnt it. Obviously, this being piano, learning a piece is going to be a big part of the structure. So how do you structure your class, and what do you need to include? We've talked a little bit about starter, main task and plenary, but I'm going to tell you about specifically how I structure my classes and my kind of, I guess, interpretation of that 3-part structure. So this is regardless of whether it's my 4 to 5 year olds or my older kids. With my 4 to 5 year olds, I would put in more activities and more change in activity, but this is a rough outline of my structure. So everyone comes in, and I'm going to talk in normal times, not in COVID times. We all sit around the table, or if they're my very little ones, we'll sit on the floor, and I give them an opportunity to tell me whatever it is they're desperate to tell me, because you'll find that they do like to bring their life stories to the class, and they know that that's the time to do it, not in the middle of learning. So and I would also kind of take a register at that point, quite informally. And then we would get to it. So we would start with, I often, if I have planned a listening task or some kind of oral task, I will often start with that, because I think we're in a music lesson, we're in a piano lesson, it's really nice for them to hear live music or recorded music. Sometimes I play things from Spotify. And so we might start by introducing the concept with a piece of listening or an oral task, which I will play on the piano. So we started with either a piece of listening or a game, and these things introduce the concept. So I'm saying, right, this is what we're going to be learning this week. And I can tell you in the most basic form, because my little keynotes kids, which are the 4 to 5 year olds, they have kind of their structure and what we learn and the content is so consistent week to week, because that age particularly need it. So if I go through what I do with them, that will give you the simplest terms. So we have the little chat, the little song, whatever we're doing. Then I have these laminates, these keyboard laminates of 2 black keys and 3 black keys, and I get them to I give them one each, and I get them to lay them out on the floor. And then we're thinking about which note we're looking at for the lesson. Excuse me. So say we're looking at a C. We would talk about how we find our C. We talk about the 2 and 3 black key patterns, and this is how we find our C. And I would give them pom-poms, and then they're all putting their pom-poms on C. So I'm very quickly able to see who has understood where a C is. I then take them to the piano, to the main piano, and again, I'm looking for evidence that they have learnt how to find a C without any without any external props, just going to a piano, can they find a C? And I line them up and they show me one by one that they can indeed, or they cannot. And if they can't, then that's up to me to kind of reinforce further. Once they've done that, they go to the tables and they colour in their C in their workbook. So that is kind of what I would call the starter. The big focus is on C. We might do something about finger numbers. We might do something about dynamics, pitch, etc. as part of our starter. But this is the one that's consistent every week, this finding the note and then finding up the piano and then colouring it in. Then I will do my teacher modelling. I call it my Maria von Trapp moment, which I can't do at the moment because of COVID, but I have all the kids standing around me at the piano and we sing the song for the lesson, and we sing the finger numbers, the lyrics and the letter name, just to really get that melody embedded, get them kind of really assimilating that melody, so that when they go off to the keyboards, which they do after that, they have a really good chance of being able to play it. So then we have what I would say that's part of the main part of the lesson, me teaching them, singing with them. And then we have the part where they go to the keyboards, and this, as I say, is in all my classes. They'll wear their headphones for little keynotes it'd be for less time, for the older ones it'd be for more time, where they practice the piece for the lesson. And I would take them, I would go round and make sure that everyone is accessing the most kind of basic version of the piece. And then it's up to me to either help them if they need it, or to push them on if they don't, to kind of challenge them further if they don't need it. So that is maybe a few minutes for the little keynotes, maybe more for the older ones. And then they take their headphones out and we do what I would call the plenary, which is where they all play it to me, to each other, and I give my feedback. So I would say, wow, what I really loved about that, I always give something good first, so a point that they've done well first, and then I'd give them one step. So next time perhaps you could do this. If they've done it completely wrong, we don't want to overwhelm them with tips or with things to do to improve. If they've done it perfectly, then I always have something else I can ask them to do. I can get them to do it in the other hand. I can add something else. I can always think of something else that they can do. So it's always, for everyone, one good point and one thing that they can work on next. So we've heard everyone. The kids have heard my feedback to everyone, which is a really important part of the lesson. And then we all play the piece together. So we've ended kind of playing together. Now, if we have time, I might do something that further consolidates what we've done that lesson, whether it's, and it's in line with my general objective. So whether it's waving a scarf in time of the music for the little ones, a finger number song, etc. But I have, some general objectives that I want them all to be meeting within the level. And we're just constantly doing little games and songs that kind of match those criteria, match those objectives. And then, of course, at the very end, I give them all a sticker. So that is kind of my rough structure. And as I say, you'll need to have a think about how you want to structure your class. That takes me 30 minutes, by the way, so roughly how long you think your class should be, roughly how long you think you will need. I tend to believe that 4 to 5 year olds can't cope very well with more than 30 minutes, and if you are keeping them for 45 minutes, if you are teaching them for 45 minutes, it might be the case that you have 15 minutes where they're not really taking anything on new, so you'd need to plan for that very specifically. So you need to plan more experience things rather than learning tasks. With my older ones, I do 45 minutes, and apart from the content being different, it's roughly the same structure. We introduce a concept, we do teacher modelling, we practice at the piano, we perform, and that is my lesson structure. I want to say a little bit about planning for progress, because I think I suspect that if you're very used to a linear one-to-one book that moves along next page, and it goes very much at the pace of the individual child, you'll need to perhaps consider a more all-around approach. Like if you teach one-to-one in these linear method books, you rely on just going along the line that this book goes along. You're not really having to think about overall objectives other than you're teaching them to play the piano. But if you want to make sure, if you want something to measure your kids against, and I don't mean in an assessment-y type way, I mean just purely you need to know that they're making progress, then you need an overarching plan. You need to have a think about what it is in this particular class, in this particular level, what do I want them to learn and how am I going to get them there? And then within each class, all of your aims and objectives need to be related to the bigger aims and objectives. It's a big kind of task, definitely, but I think that because we can't, if we want our classes to be flexible, if we want to be meeting the needs of individual learners, I don't think we should be relying on the kind of the layout of a more normal one-to-one method book, because they are definitely more suited to when you're working with children individually. So have a think about that. Have a think about if you had a group of 6-year-olds in front of you, what would the order of things that you would introduce? What would your overall aims be for them? And how would you implement them? How would you evidence them? How would you make sure that they're all achieving them? Okay. So I think lesson structure is a big subject, and I hope I haven't overwhelmed you here and made you think that this is going to be a completely impossible task. It's just, I think, a really important part of group piano, and that's why I wanted to dedicate a whole day, a whole section of training to it, and get you really thinking about how groups are different to one-to-one, and how you're going to manage the learning, how you're going to plan for the learning, how it's going to be evidenced. And I hope that this has helped. And of course, ask me any questions, send me an email, write a comment underneath the video, post in a Facebook group. And the benefit of the Facebook groups, you've got lots of teachers that already teach groups in there. And, I do it my way, but there'll be lots of different ways that people do it. So you can always ask in there, and you might get a variety of perspectives. Okay, see you.